Welcome to the California Labor Lab's first annual conference. We're new, and that's why this is our first conference. The conference theme that you see before you is Precarious Work, Health and Economic Threats. And the conference, as you know, extends through tomorrow. So it's a 2-day conference, and we appreciate your attendance. So a little disclaimer, Total Worker Health, we're one of the Total Worker Health Centers, is something that our NIOSH friends developed, and we're happy to respect that they have a copyright on the name of that program, the most important program. In terms of disclosures, I have no financial relationships to disclose, with the exception that the center is supported by a grant from NIOSH's Total Worker Health Program. So the mission of the California Labor Laboratory is to extend the pursuit of health and safety for workers in traditional employment to those in a wide range of alternative arrangements, the ways that people are hired to do their jobs in the contemporary economy, and in partnership with affected communities. One thing that is an important precept of our center is that the future of work is now. Technologies of production and work organization are always evolving. There is always a new future in purely technological terms. What has emerged over the last several decades, however, is a systematic effort to deflect responsibility for workers' welfare. That change has already occurred and is an important organizing principle for many employers. That strategy has certainly been abetted by the globalization of production, with its attendant impact on workers. Has the pandemic upset that and given workers new powers? We shall see. Some of us are a little skeptical. The strategy of employment upends protections for workers that were developed in the 20th century. So when we talk about emergent working conditions in our center, we're talking about the way that employers increasingly diffuse responsibilities for workers' welfare by using task, for example, gig, project-based, or subcontracting employment, by using contingent forms of employment, and by eroding working conditions regardless of the way people are hired or the extent of contingency in their work. In the 20th century, you see before you a series of important legislative victories that developed a sort of firewall to protect workers' health and welfare. And unfortunately, when people are hired in many of these alternative ways, like gig work, they are not offered these protections. You have to have a workplace to be protected by workplace protections. So some of the examples of how these changes are affecting workers: from the San Francisco Chronicle a few months ago, there was a headline, Google giving employees access to free coronavirus tests, but union says access is unequal. To quote the article, full-time Google employees had access to at-home coronavirus tests for themselves and their families, but that's not the case for thousands of company contractors and temporary workers, according to a Google engineer. Of course, the absurdity of the policy, the contract and temporary workers not only put themselves and their families at risk when they don't have access to tests, but they also put at risk the permanent employees of Google as well. We live in a world in which being near other humans spreads contagion. So there's another example, and for these next 3 slides, I thank our investigator at the California Labor Lab, Kristen Cummings. She did an investigation of a soy processing plant several years ago. And it's the processing results in respiratory illnesses. And somebody at the plant said, nobody does that task. But then they actually hired contract employers to do that task. So in fact, they were shifting the risk to those workers, which is a perfect segue to Dr. Hacker's keynote, perhaps. It's hard to imagine a better example of the great risk shift than temporary workers forced to do tasks like soy processing that permanent employees are not asked to do, unless there's contract workers at Google not offered COVID tests, infecting the rest of us who are hired on a more permanent basis. Ultimately, none of us are immune to the strategy of breaking down the 20th century firewall through the use of alternative work arrangements, contingent employment, and the erosion of working conditions, least of all in academia, where the use of adjuncts is growing by leaps and bounds. So a note on the keynote, Hackers Conference talk today is the Edward A. Dixon Emeritus Professorship Lecture, and I thank the Academic Affairs Office at UCSF for awarding me the Dixon Professorship. And then a couple of notes on meeting logistics in terms of technical issues. If there are any problems during the transmission, you can contact the lab's educational coordinator, Michelle Meyer, through the private chat function on the Zoom, by her email, mmeyer@berkeley.edu, and by the phone number you see on your screen. So you see before you today's schedule. This talk will be followed by a talk from the Shift Project investigators, a break, a talk by John Schwartzberg on how the translation of work into health problems occurs, and from a member of the Domestic Workers Union defining a new model of the future of work. And then an eminent psychologist, Cristina, who actually invented research on burnout, will present her work in that area. Tomorrow's schedule you see before you. If you go to our, you'll have a copy of the agenda. I'm not going to dwell on tomorrow's any more than to show it here. And it's now my pleasure to introduce the moderator for the symposium over the next couple of days, my colleague, Cristina Banks. Dr. Banks, who is an organizational psychologist, teaches at the high school where she has been influencing many generations of students at this point to understand that securing the health of the workers in workplaces is a important duty of those who will be in managerial positions. And also, she is the director at Berkeley in the School of Public Health of the Interdisciplinary Center for Healthy Workplaces. So she was a natural to become the outreach director for our new center because she's been focused on healthy workplaces. Our focus is a little broader. It's on healthy work, since many of the new forms of employment are not constrained to an individual workplace. In fact, as I showed in that slide about the firewall, often workers do not have a workplace and do not have workplace protections. So without further ado, I'd like to turn this over to Dr. Banks, the Director of Outreach for our center. Thank you.